Lead is a heavy metal that has been known to us since ancient times. Today, it's used in electronics, roofing materials, batteries, and many other products. Despite its many uses, lead is known to be toxic with no safe level of consumption. Measures to control its use have been taken since the 1970s, for example in paints, petrol, food cans, and also in jewelry. Lead used in outdoor shooting ammunition is also causing concern.
Lead is one of the most poisonous metals that we have.
I think people would be absolutely astonished at the quantities of lead ammunition that are released into the environment in Europe year on year.
Nearly 100,000 tons of lead is dispersed into the environment in the European Union each year from sport shooting, hunting, and fishing. Once in the environment, lead builds up in soils and sediments, and lead fragments can be ingested by wildlife. At least 127 million birds are at risk of lead poisoning each year in the EU.
Seeing dead birds on the post-mortem table, sometimes with hundreds of pieces of shot, and trying to understand where birds are picking up hundreds of pieces of shot, the suggestion is probably that it is in areas with very high levels of shooting.
So when the lead shot enters the gizzard of such a duck or water bird or any bird, the gizzard will erode the metal and it will be absorbed in the digestive tract.
It affects their immune systems, their behaviour and their reproductive ability, so it's a very powerful toxin.
In 2021, the EU restricted the use of lead in gunshot for hunting and sport shooting in wetlands. But what about other uses of lead in outdoor shooting? We know, for example, that most hunting and sport shooting takes place in terrestrial environments. The European Chemicals Agency investigated if the use of lead in ammunition should be more widely controlled.
People are exposed to lead through two main routes. So there's ingestion and inhalation. The hunters and shooters, they can inhale dust fumes or lead fumes when they are actually shooting. You can also be exposed to lead by eating game meat.
Lead from rifle bullets may fragment and spread into the tissues of venison or game meat, and that's where you then get a link to human consumers.
Each year, about 1 million children are vulnerable to the toxic effects of lead from game meat consumption.
It really impacts children. It has an effect on the central nervous system. There are epidemiological studies. Many show that a higher level of lead in blood is clearly associated with a lower intellectual performance, with lower IQ.
In the EU, there are as many as 10 million hunters, 2.5 million sports shooters, so replacing lead may not be so straightforward. But would it be possible to manage the risks without replacing lead completely?
Lead is a problem for water birds and wetlands. In terrestrial environments, there is risk, but in general that risk is much lower. And where you have risk, we feel this risk can be managed.
Some national food agencies give recommendations for managing the risks of game meat killed using lead ammunition.
The standard advice is you can manage that risk. You can cut around the wound channel.
You may well push the small pieces of lead to one side, but you are being exposed to small shards of lead throughout the food.
Research from the Federal Institute of Risk Assessment in Germany clearly states that lead remains in the edible parts of the game.
The normal consumption of game meat, certainly looking at some of the evidence, is not that high. Certainly within the general population it's very low, and even within the majority of the hunting community it may not be that high either. Some work has been done and it hasn't shown a clear correlation between a hunter ingesting game meat, eating game meat, and having elevated blood lead levels.
I think that getting together, some of the EU's best risk assessors and best risk managers will really ensure that any restriction proposal is robust and sound and fair.
What about alternatives? Can they replace the use of lead? And do we know that they're actually safer and better for the environment?
We've looked at the risks for human health and the environment for alternative materials for bullets and gunshot. And our analysis shows that these alternative materials are safer than lead. And this is also documented in our report.
There is a discussion around non-lead rifle ammunition, for example, where some will say there are alternatives available, ban it tomorrow morning, problem solved. The industry will say, well, it's not that simple.
Within the EU, some of these alternatives might still be a bit higher in price, but obviously currently there's also no market for them.
You know, credit to the ammunition industry then for developing these things, but they really need guaranteed markets. We need a restriction proposal with a guarantee for them so that they know that they can develop these non-toxics and that the hunting community then will have something which will serve every type of shooting that they do.
Field tests and experience from countries where regulations on lead ammunition have been adopted show that lead-free ammunition can be effective.
Field tests from the UK, Germany and Denmark have shown that lead-free ammunition works.
In Denmark we have had a ban on lead shot hunting for more decades now. There's a new generation of hunters that don't even think about what they're using, and they have no need to use a lead shot.
So there are alternatives that can be used for hunting. For certain types of sport shooting, finding alternatives can be more challenging.
Currently, research and development in our field indicates that there aren't really any viable alternatives to lead. Then management of lead on shooting ranges is absolutely critical.
Some shooting ranges already do that. And what you can find on these shooting ranges are large walls with nets or bullet traps behind the targets.
At this shooting range, which is located at the groundwater area, the risk of lead is managed by these wall structures that are covered so that lead can be collected. In Finland, we have done quite a lot of work during the past 10 years to develop the risk assessment and risk management of shooting ranges.
So if these walls and bullet traps are not there, lead can spread into the environment and cause harm to the soil and to the groundwater.
The European Chemicals Agency's proposal is now ready. It has assessed and identified options to address the risks. It also describes the impacts of the measures on people's health and the environment, and the estimated cost to society. 2 scientific committees will look at the proposed restriction. One at the risks of lead from these uses, and the other at the social and economic impacts. Then the European Commission and Member States decide on the restriction.
For hunting, we propose a ban on the use of lead ammunition, and there's a wide variety of alternatives available to hunters. For the use of lead gunshot in sport shooting, we've analyzed 2 options. One is a ban, and the second one is a set of conditions under which the use can still continue if the risks to the environment are minimized.
The hunting community isn't confident that you can switch to non-lead in rifle ammunition anytime soon. Our concern is that can the European Chemicals Agency look at this in a proportionate way? There are many knowledge gaps. We are unsure of how these knowledge gaps will be dealt with. Does a knowledge gap mean that we don't have information here, so there doesn't seem to be a problem, so we can progress? Or is a knowledge gap, we need some time to try and understand the complexity of the issue?
It's fantastic that this is such an evidence-based, scientific process, and we really want to support that to make sure that they have all the information they need when they are making the assessments, for the restriction proposal.
The good thing about this restriction proposal is it is going to bring about, hopefully, a non-toxic future. And what we see in that are real benefits for all. So we see likely increases in wildlife numbers, we see no risks then to domestic animals from lead, and we see real benefits for the hunting community. They can start selling their game meat into wider markets, and we can be eating that knowing that it's not full of lead.
It's a rather simple thing, but it is complicated because it's a very political issue. It's something that breaks up with the traditional thinking of hunters.
We are by no means committed forever to lead. If we can find alternatives, then we would happily use them.
We should always strive to have least exposure possible. I think that's the best way to go.
If we want to promote hunting being a sustainable activity, and we want to make the public accept hunting, it's important that it's not connected with the dispersal of a toxic metal in nature.
The interest of the European Chemicals Agency is not to ban sport shooting, hunting or fishing. Our interest is to protect human health and the environment.